Welcome to another deep dive with us.
Yeah.
Today we're tackling Brianna Wiest's The Mountain Is You.
Okay.
Have you heard of this one?
I have, yeah.
Yeah, it's all about self-sabotage and figuring out why we do it to ourselves.
Yeah, why we get in our own way.
Exactly. Like sometimes it feels like there's this invisible force
Right.
that's like working against us,
Yeah,
you know?
absolutely.
So are you ready to kind of climb this mountain of self-discovery?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
Okay, awesome. So I think one of the things that really struck me
Yeah.
when I was reading this book was just this idea that self-sabotage, it's not about intentionally hurting ourselves.
Right.
It's not like we're consciously choosing to fail or to make things harder.
Yeah, it's more complex than that. It's like
Ah.
Wiest says it's this conflict between our conscious desires
Okay,
and our unconscious needs.
that makes sense.
Yeah, like on
Yeah.
the surface, we might want something,
Uh,
but deep down, we might be afraid of it.
oh, so like a good example of that would be, let's say you really want that promotion at work, but then you find yourself procrastinating
Yes.
or missing deadlines
Totally.
or even like skipping important meetings.
Yeah, it's like part of you wants the promotion.
Right.
But then another part of you is scared of the responsibility.
Oh, so it's not just about like willpower or self-esteem.
Right. It's deeper than that.
There's this whole psychological game going on.
Exactly. It's about understanding those underlying needs and fears.
So then how do we even begin to like uncover those things?
Well, Weiss talks about this idea of rageful determination.
Okay.
Have you heard of that before?
I think I have.
It's like this fierce commitment
It's okay.
to uncovering those needs and then changing the patterns.
So it's about getting like fed up with our own excuses.
Yes. And demanding more from ourselves.
That's powerful. I love that. It's like tapping into that inner warrior
Uh-huh.
who's ready to like break free from the chains of self-sabotage.
Exactly.
Okay. But how do we actually start to identify these patterns?
Well, Weiss suggests paying attention to that feeling,
Okay.
that something's off,
Oh.
even when things seem okay on the surface.
Okay, yeah.
Like you might be successful in your career, but still feel this constant anxiety.
Right.
Or you might achieve a goal,
Yeah.
but then immediately feel lost and directionless.
Oh, that's so true.
That disconnect can be a sign of self-sabotage.
It's not necessarily about like feeling miserable all the time,
Right.
but more about this persistent sense of dissonance.
Yeah, like something's not quite right.
It's like you order this amazing meal, but then you douse it in hot sauce.
Okay.
You're still eating, but you're ruining the experience.
Exactly. You're sabotaging your own enjoyment.
So in the book, Wiest outlines several common self-sabotage patterns. I thought we could maybe dive into a few of them,
Yeah, absolutely.
ones that I think might really resonate with our listeners.
Okay.
So the first one that I wanted to talk about is procrastination.
Oh, yeah, the class.
Because I think we all experience this to some degree, right?
Absolutely. Everyone procrastinates sometimes.
Yeah, it's that feeling of putting off important tasks, even though you know you should be tackling them.
Like that term paper that's due next week.
Oh, yeah, or that big project at work,
Right.
or even just like cleaning the house.
Totally. It can be anything.
And sometimes I think it's the fear of studying something new, or maybe the pressure of getting it perfect.
Yeah, it can be paralyzing.
It's like standing at the base of a mountain and feeling completely overwhelmed by the climb ahead.
A Wiest links it to a discomfort with the unfamiliar.
Okay.
Our brains crave comfort and predictability.
So it's like our brains are saying,
Yeah.
let's just stick with what we know,
Right. Even if it's not really serving us.
even if it's keeping us stuck.
Exactly.
We'd rather stay in our cozy base camp
Yeah.
than risk the climb, even if the view from the summit is amazing.
It's about understanding that resistance to change
Okay.
and finding ways to push past it.
So then what about disorganization?
Okay, so disorganization can also be a form of self-sabotage.
Really?
Yeah, you might be great at planning and organizing, but then you avoid actually doing the work.
Oh my gosh, that is so me.
Right.
I am like the queen of to-do lists
Yeah.
and color-coded calendars and project plans.
But
But then I get stuck in this weird limbo of like analysis paralysis.
Yeah.
The getting organized part becomes the goal.
Right.
And then taking action just feels way too daunting.
Wiest suggests that it stems from a fear of what happens next.
Oh, so after the order is achieved.
Exactly. Like we subconsciously create chaos to avoid taking that next step.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, it's like we're afraid of potential challenges or failures.
So it's like we build this beautiful organized base camp,
Mm-hmm.
but then we're too afraid to actually leave it.
and start the expedition.
Okay, that's a great analogy.
So another pattern that she talks about is judging others.
Oh, yeah. We all do that.
And she connects this to masking our own insecurities.
Okay, that makes sense.
It's easier to point out flaws in others than to confront our own shortcomings.
It's like that classic deflection tactic.
Exactly.
They're so busy critiquing other people's gear and techniques that we forget to check our own.
Exactly. It's a way to avoid looking inward.
So then what about minimizing our achievements?
Ah, yes, that's a tricky one.
Yeah, because on the surface, it seems like a good thing, right?
Like being humble.
Right.
But it can actually be a form of self-sabotage.
Okay.
It can be tied to a fear of peaking.
Oh, like we're afraid to acknowledge our success because we worry about what happens next.
What if it's all downhill from here?
Exactly. It's like we reach a certain altitude and suddenly we get hit with this wave of fear.
Like we've already reached our highest peak.
Okay, so we've talked about procrastination, disorganization, judging others, and minimizing our achievements.
Those are some big ones.
But there's another really interesting concept that I wanted to touch on.
Okay, what's that?
And that is what Wiest calls the upper limit.
Oh, yes, the upper limit.
What is that all about?
It's essentially our internal thermostat for happiness.
Okay.
Like the level of joy and success that we allow ourselves to experience.
So it's like our internal GPS is set for a specific altitude, and any attempts to climb higher trigger an alarm system.
It can feel that way.
But wouldn't we want to keep pushing ourselves?
Of course.
Like, wouldn't we want to keep expanding our capacity for happiness?
Ideally, yes.
And for success?
Yeah, but it's not always that simple.
Right, because our brains are kind of wired for comfort.
Exactly.
Comfort and predictability.
Not always for happiness.
So when we push past those self-imposed limits, it can trigger a fear response.
Oh, it's like our brains are saying, whoa, whoa, whoa.
Yeah, like danger, retreat back to safety.
It's fascinating how our own biology can hold us back like that.
It's like we have this internal saboteur.
Whispering doubts and fears in our ears.
Urging us to turn back.
Before we reach the summit.
Okay, so then how do we deal with that?
That's where things get really interesting.
I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Well, we suggest that we need to reframe our relationship with negative emotions, like fear and anger and guilt.
But we're always told to suppress those emotions.
Right.
To see them as weaknesses.
Yeah, but Wiest argues that they can be valuable messengers.
If we know how to listen to them.
Exactly. Instead of pushing them away, she encourages us to explore them.
Okay, so give me an example.
Let's say you're feeling jealous of a colleague's success. Instead of wallowing in that jealousy, ask yourself, what about their achievement resonates with me?
Okay.
What unmet need or desire is this jealousy highlighting?
Oh, that's interesting.
It's about turning that negative energy into fuel for self-discovery.
Instead of seeing jealousy as a threat, you can use it as a compass.
Exactly. A compass to guide you towards what you truly value.
And speaking of inner guidance, Wiest also talks about intuition.
Yes, that gut feeling.
So it's not about like some mystical sixth sense or anything.
Right. It's more about learning to discern between fear reactions and that deeper inner knowing.
So it's like developing that inner compass.
Precisely. And trusting it to guide you.
Even when the path ahead feels uncertain.
Even when it feels scary.
Okay. But how do we cultivate that?
Well, one way is through mindfulness.
Okay.
Becoming more present and aware.
Of our thoughts and feelings.
Yes, and bodily sensations.
Yeah.
It's about creating space.
Okay.
To listen to that inner wisdom without judgment.
So like quieting the noise.
Exactly. Like tuning into that deeper frequency where your intuition resides.
Okay, I love that analogy.
Now, once we start to understand our needs and tap into our intuition, the next step is to address those self-sabotaging behaviors.
Okay, so how do we do that?
Well, this is where Wiest challenges the conventional idea of self-care.
Oh, that's interesting.
Because we're always hearing about self-care, right?
Yeah, bubble baths, face masks, Netflix binges.
Are you saying those are all bad?
I mean, they sound pretty good to me.
They can be helpful.
Okay.
But Wiest argues that true self-care goes beyond those temporary distractions.
Okay, so it's more about meeting our fundamental needs.
Exactly. The foundation upon which lasting change can be built.
So less about treating the symptoms and more about addressing the root cause.
Precisely.
Okay, so what are some of those fundamental needs?
She talks about things like adequate sleep,
okay,
nutritious food, a clean and organized environment,
right,
appropriate clothing,
yeah,
and most importantly, emotional expression.
Those sound so basic.
They are.
But we often neglect them.
It's true.
It's like we're trying to climb a mountain on an empty stomach.
And with no sleep.
Exactly. No wonder we struggle.
When those needs are met,
yeah,
we create a stable foundation for growth.
Okay, so it's like building that solid base camp
Right.
before we even attempt the summit. Now, Wiest also connects self-sabotage to a lack of emotional intelligence. And I think that's something that a lot of people can relate to.
Absolutely.
So what does she mean by that?
She's talking about the ability to understand and manage our emotions effectively.
Right.
When we can't navigate our emotional landscape, we're more likely to make choices that undermine our well-being.
So it's not just about recognizing our emotions.
Right.
It's about learning how to process them in a healthy way.
Exactly. It's about developing that emotional literacy and building the skills to regulate our responses.
Especially in challenging situations.
Yeah.
So like having a toolkit for navigating those treacherous mountain passes.
Without the right gear and skills,
Yes.
we're more likely to get lost or injured.
So then what are some of the tools in that toolkit?
Well, Wiest provides several practical strategies for developing emotional intelligence.
I'm all ears.
One key concept is understanding the dopamine trap.
The dopamine trap.
You know how we're constantly bombarded with messages and stimuli?
Yeah.
Designed to trigger those feel-good chemicals in our brains.
Like social media notifications.
Yes.
Online shopping, that endless scroll of content.
It's like we're chasing that next dopamine hit.
But the satisfaction is always fleeting.
Exactly. And this constant pursuit of external validation can keep us stuck in a cycle of wanting more.
Without ever feeling fulfilled.
It's like trying to climb a mountain made of candy.
Okay, I love that analogy.
It might look tempting, but it offers no real sustenance or stability.
It's a powerful reminder that true fulfillment comes from within.
Exactly. Not from external rewards or validation.
Okay, so then what's another strategy?
Another important aspect is learning to embrace the discomfort of change.
Oh, yeah, that's a tough one.
Because, as we discussed earlier, our brains are wired for comfort and predictability.
So when we step outside our comfort zones,
we're bound to encounter resistance.
It's like leaving the familiar warmth of our base camp.
And venturing into the unknown.
It's natural to feel apprehensive.
Absolutely.
But instead of resisting that discomfort, Wiest encourages us to lean into it.
To recognize that growth and expansion require us to embrace the unknown.
And to navigate those uncomfortable feelings.
It's like those initial steps on a challenging hike.
Yeah.
It might feel strenuous at first, but as you acclimate, the journey becomes more manageable, even enjoyable.
Okay, so then what's the next tool in our toolkit?
Wiest also stresses the importance of identifying and addressing those unconscious beliefs and attachments.
Oh, those hidden scripts running in the background.
Exactly. The ones shaping our perceptions and influencing our choices.
It's like those invisible guide ropes, leading us along familiar but not necessarily desirable paths.
We might not even be aware they're there.
But they're subtly steering our every move.
And to uncover these hidden beliefs, Wiest suggests asking ourselves some questions.
Like what kind of questions?
Like, what are the negative associations I'm making with my goals?
Okay.
What limiting beliefs about myself or the world am I holding on to?
It's like shining a light on those shadowy corners of our minds.
Exactly.
Revealing the hidden patterns that might be keeping us stuck.
And once we've identified those beliefs, we can start to challenge and rewrite them.
It's like updating our internal GPS.
With a more accurate and empowering map.
Okay, so what else do we need in our emotional intelligence toolkit?
Another key strategy is learning to accept the inevitability of setbacks.
Oh, yeah. The dreaded setbacks.
They can feel so discouraging.
Like we're losing ground.
But Wiest reminds us that setbacks are an inherent part of any journey.
Especially one of growth and transformation.
Instead of seeing them as failures, she encourages us to reframe them as feedback.
Okay.
Valuable opportunities to learn and adjust.
It's like those experienced mountaineers who use each fall or near miss as a chance to refine their skills.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They understand that the journey is rarely a straight line.
It's about developing that grit and determination.
That allows us to get back up and keep climbing.
Even when the going gets tough.
Exactly.
Okay, so I think we've covered a lot of ground here.
You have.
But there's one more strategy that I wanted to touch on.
Okay, what's that?
And that is the power of micro changes.
Ah, yes, micro changes.
Because I think we often get caught up in this idea that we need to make these massive sweeping changes to see real results.
Like we need to overhaul our entire lives.
Exactly.
But it doesn't have to be that way.
Okay.
Wiest argues that real change happens gradually through small, consistent actions over time.
So it's about making those micro adjustments.
Exactly, to our thoughts, behaviors, and habits.
And when those small changes are compounded over time,
they can lead to remarkable results.
It's like those tiny but persistent movements of a glacier that over centuries can carve out entire valleys.
Exactly. Small changes can have a huge impact.
Okay, so in addition to emotional intelligence, Wiest also highlights the importance of unlocking our inner power.
Inner power.
Sounds a bit superhero-ish.
It does, but it's more about self-awareness and self-acceptance. And the courage to live in alignment with our values.
So it's about recognizing our strengths and weaknesses?
Yes.
Embracing our imperfections? And acting with intention and purpose?
Exactly. It's about owning our unique journey.
And making choices that reflect our authentic selves.
And that brings us to a really important point.
Okay, what's that?
True power comes from self-awareness.
Not from external validation.
Not from trying to fit into someone else's mold.
So it's like those solo climbers who brave the elements and push their limits.
Yes.
Not for fame or recognition.
But for the pure joy of the challenge.
And the pursuit of their own personal summit.
Exactly. It's about finding that inner drive and motivation.
Okay, so how do we cultivate this inner power?
Well, Wiest offers some great insights.
Okay, I'm listening.
She talks about becoming comfortable with not being liked by everyone.
Oh, that's a tough one.
It is, but it's so important.
Because that fear of judgment can really hold us back.
It can keep us playing small.
And conforming to expectations that don't align with our true selves.
But when we're secure in ourselves, we don't need to seek external validation.
We can make choices that are aligned with our values.
Exactly, even if they don't please everyone.
It's about recognizing that not everyone is going to understand our journey.
And that's okay.
We don't need to convince everyone to climb our mountain with us.
And she also talks about acting with purpose and a long-term vision.
Oh, that's so important.
It's like having that clear sense of direction.
That internal compass that guides our every step.
Even when the path ahead feels uncertain.
It's about defining our own definition of success and aligning our actions with those goals.
It's about focusing on the climb.
Not just the summit.
Embracing the journey.
Trusting the process.
And knowing that each step, no matter how small,
is bringing us closer to our destination. Okay, so before we move on to the next part of our deep dive, I just wanted to recap some of the key points we've covered so far.
Oh, good.
So we talked about how self-sabotage is not about intentionally hurting ourselves. It's about this conflict between our conscious desires and our unconscious needs.
And we explored some common self-sabotage patterns.
Like procrastination, disorganization, judging others, and minimizing our achievements.
And we discussed the concept of the upper limit.
That internal thermostat for happiness.
And the importance of reframing negative emotions.
And tapping into our intuition.
And meeting our fundamental needs.
And developing emotional intelligence.
And unlocking our inner power.
Wow, that's a lot to unpack.
It is, but it's all connected.
So are you ready to continue our climb?
I'm ready. Let's keep exploring.
Awesome. Let's do it. Okay, so last time we were talking about how our brains are kind of wired for comfort, not always for happiness.
Right. And so when we push past those self-imposed limits.
Yeah, those upper limits.
Exactly. It can trigger that fear response.
Right. Like a danger signal.
Right. Like, hey, this unfamiliar terrain feels dangerous.
And our brains are like, let's retreat.
Back to safety.
Fascinating.
It is. It's like we have this internal saboteur who's always trying to keep us stuck.
In our comfort zones.
Even if it's not where we truly want to be.
So then how do we, deal with that?
Well, Wiest suggests that we need to reframe our relationship with those negative emotions.
Oh, yeah, like fear and anger and guilt.
Exactly. Those are the ones we tend to avoid.
Yeah, we're always told to suppress them.
Right, to see them as weaknesses.
But Wiest argues that they can actually be valuable.
If we know how to listen to them.
Okay, so instead of pushing them away, we should explore them.
Exactly. Like, let's say you're feeling jealous of a colleague's success. Instead of wallowing in that jealousy, ask yourself, what about their achievement resonates with me?
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, it's a different perspective, right?
It is.
It's about turning that negative energy into fuel for self-discovery.
So instead of seeing jealousy as a threat,
right,
we can use it as a compass.
To guide us towards what we truly value.
I love that.
And that brings us to another important concept.
Okay.
Intuition.
Oh, that gut feeling.
Exactly. That inner voice that tells us what's right for us.
But sometimes it can be hard to hear that voice.
Especially when we're caught up in our heads.
Yeah, like when we're overthinking everything.
So Weiss suggests practicing mindfulness.
Okay.
Becoming more present and aware.
Of our thoughts and feelings.
Exactly. It's about creating space.
To listen to that inner wisdom.
Without judgment.
It's like quieting the noise.
And tuning into that deeper frequency.
Where our intuition resides.
Exactly.
Carry
So
on.
now, once we start to understand our needs and tap into our intuition, the next step is to address those self-sabotaging behaviors.
Okay, so how do we actually do that?
Well, this is where Weiss challenges the conventional idea of self-care.
Okay, that's interesting because we're always hearing about self-care.
Right. Bubble baths, face masks, Netflix binges.
All the good stuff.
But Wiest argues that true self-care goes deeper.
Deeper than bubble baths.
It's about meeting our fundamental needs.
Okay, so it's less about treating the symptoms and more about addressing the root cause.
Exactly.
Okay, so what are some of those fundamental needs?
She talks about things like adequate sleep,
Right.
nutritious food, a clean and organized environment,
Right.
appropriate clothing,
Okay.
and most importantly, emotional expression.
Those sound so basic.
They are, but we often neglect them.
It's true. It's like we're trying to climb a mountain on an empty stomach.
And with no sleep.
Exactly. No wonder we struggle.
So when those needs are met, we create that stable foundation.
For growth and transformation.
Precisely. It's like building a solid base camp.
Before we even attempt the summit.
Exactly.
Now, Wiest also connects self-sabotage to a lack of emotional intelligence.
Which is a really important concept.
It is. I think a lot of people can relate to that.
So she's talking about the ability
Yeah.
to understand and manage our emotions effectively.
Okay, so it's not just about recognizing our emotions.
Right.
It's also about learning how to process them.
In a healthy and constructive way.
So it's like developing that emotional literacy.
Yes, and building the skills to regulate our responses.
Especially when we're faced with challenging situations.
That's like having a toolkit.
Okay.
For navigating those treacherous mountain passes.
Without the right gear and skills.
You're more likely to get lost or injured.
So what are some of the tools in this emotional intelligence toolkit?
Well, Wiest provides some really practical strategies.
Okay, tell me more.
One key concept is understanding the dopamine trap.
The dopamine trap.
You know how we're constantly bombarded with messages designed to trigger those feel-good chemicals?
Oh, like social media notifications,
Like
online shopping, that endless scroll of content.
It's like we're chasing that next dopamine hit.
But the satisfaction is always fleeting.
And this constant pursuit of external validation can keep us stuck.
In that cycle of wanting more.
Without ever feeling truly fulfilled.
So it's like we're trying to climb a mountain made of candy.
It might look tempting, but it offers no real sustenance.
No real stability.
Right.
It's a good analogy.
It is. It's about recognizing that true fulfillment comes from within.
Okay, so then what's another strategy?
Another important aspect is learning to embrace the discomfort of change.
Oh, yeah, that's a tough one.
It is. But remember, our brains are wired for comfort.
And predictability.
So when we try to step outside those comfort zones,
we inevitably encounter resistance.
Right. It's like leaving the familiar warmth of our base camp.
And venturing into the unknown.
Exactly.
So it's natural to feel a little apprehensive.
But instead of resisting that discomfort, Wiest encourages us to lean into it.
To recognize that growth and expansion require us to embrace the unknown.
And to navigate those uncomfortable feelings.
Okay, that makes sense.
It's like those initial steps on a challenging hike. It might feel strenuous at first, but as you acclimate and build your endurance, the journey becomes more manageable, even and enjoyable.
Okay, so what else is in our toolkit?
Wiest also stresses the importance of identifying.
Okay.
And addressing those unconscious beliefs and attachments.
Those hidden scripts running in the background of our minds.
Exactly. The ones shaping our perceptions.
And influencing our choices.
Right. We might not even be aware they're there.
But they're subtly steering our every move.
So to uncover these hidden beliefs, Wiest suggests asking ourselves some key questions.
Like what kind of questions?
Like what are the negative associations I'm making with my goals?
Okay.
What limiting beliefs about myself or the world am I holding on to?
That's a good question.
It is. It's about shining a light on the shadowy corners of our minds.
And revealing the hidden patterns.
That might be keeping us stuck.
Okay, so once we've identified those beliefs, what do we do with them?
we can start to challenge them and rewrite them.
So it's like updating our internal GPS.
With a more accurate and empowering map.
I like that analogy.
Now, another key strategy is learning to accept setbacks.
Oh yeah, setbacks. Those are inevitable.
They are part of any journey.
Especially one of growth and transformation.
Right. But instead of seeing them as failures, Wiest encourages us to reframe them as feedback.
Okay.
Valuable opportunities to learn and adjust.
So it's like those experienced mountaineers.
Right.
Who use each fall or near miss as a chance to refine their skills.
Exactly. They understand that the journey is rarely a straight line.
It's about developing that grit and determination.
That allows us to get back up and keep climbing.
Even when the going gets tough.
Precisely.
So the last strategy that I wanted to touch on is the power of micro changes.
Ah, yes. Micro changes are so important.
I know. I think we often get caught up in this idea that we need to make these massive sweeping changes.
Right. Like overhaul our entire lives.
Exactly. To see any real results.
But Wiest argues that real change happens gradually.
Through small, consistent actions over time.
Exactly. Yeah. It's about those micro adjustments.
To our thoughts, behaviors, habits.
And when those small changes are compounded, they can lead to remarkable results.
It's like those tiny but persistent movements of a glacier.
Right. Over centuries, they can carve out entire valleys.
That's incredible.
It is. It's a reminder that small actions can have a huge impact.
So in addition to emotional intelligence, Wiest also highlights the importance of unlocking our inner power.
Inner power.
Yeah, it sounds a bit superhero-ish, I know.
But it's more about self-awareness and self-acceptance.
Yeah.
And the courage to live in alignment with our values.
So recognizing our strengths and weaknesses, embracing our imperfections, and acting with intention and purpose.
It's about owning our unique journey.
And making choices that reflect our authentic selves.
And that brings us to a really important point.
What's that?
True power comes from self-awareness.
Not from external validation.
Not from trying to fit into someone else's mold.
So it's like those solo climbers who brave the elements and push their limits.
Yes.
Not for fame or recognition.
But for the pure joy of the challenge.
And the pursuit of their own personal summit.
Exactly. It's about that inner drive and motivation.
Okay, so how do we cultivate this inner power?
Well, Wiest offers some really great insights.
Listening.
She talks about becoming comfortable with not being liked by everyone.
Oh, that's a tough one.
It is. It can be really challenging.
Because that fear of judgment can hold us back.
It can keep us playing small and conforming to expectations.
That don't align with our true selves.
Exactly. But when we're secure in ourselves, we don't need to seek external validation.
We can make choices based on our own values.
Even if they don't please everyone.
It's recognizing that not everyone is going to understand our journey.
And that's okay.
We don't need to convince everyone to climb our mountain with us.
And she also talks about the importance of acting with purpose. Yeah.
And having a long-term vision.
It's like having that clear sense of direction.
Right, that internal compass guiding our every step.
Even when the path ahead feels uncertain.
Exactly.
So it's about defining our own definition of success.
And aligning our actions with those goals.
It's about focusing on the climb.
Not just the summit.
Embracing the journey.
Yeah.
Trusting the process.
And knowing that each step, no matter how small,
is bringing us closer to our destination.
Precisely.
So we're not just climbing a mountain, we're actually building one as we go.
I love that analogy.
And it really speaks to one of the core messages in The Mountain is you.
Which is?
That we all have this potential, you know, to achieve great things, to overcome self-sabotage.
And to create a life that's truly aligned with our highest selves.
Exactly. And Wiest uses that mountain metaphor throughout the entire book.
Right. It's a powerful symbol.
It represents both the challenges and the aspirations we face.
In our journey of self-discovery.
And I think it also captures that sense of striving, you know, pushing ourselves beyond our comfort zones.
Encountering obstacles along the way.
But ultimately reaching new heights.
And expanding our horizons.
Exactly.
It reminds me of those like epic mountain ranges.
Oh, yeah.
That span continents. Each peak unique and awe-inspiring.
But interconnected as part of this larger grand landscape.
Yes. And Wiest reminds us that we all have our own personal mountains to climb.
Right. What might feel like a molehill to one person
could be Mount Everest to another.
It's not about comparing our journeys.
Or judging our progress based on someone else's scale.
It's about honoring our own pace.
Recognizing our own strengths.
And celebrating our own unique paths.
To the summit.
And I think that's especially important today.
Oh, yeah.
In this, like, hyper-connected world.
Where we're constantly bombarded with images of other people's lives.
It's so easy to get caught in that comparison trap.
Yeah, like on social media.
Right. We're scrolling through these curated highlight reels.
And comparing our behind-the-scenes struggles to everyone else's perfect moments.
And that can fuel those self-sabotaging tendencies.
We start to doubt ourselves.
Question our worth.
And make choices based on external validation.
Rather than our own internal compass.
So it's like we're trying to climb a mountain.
But simultaneously watching everyone else's ascent on Instagram.
Yeah, and constantly second-guessing our every move.
Wiest encourages us to turn off that noise.
To disconnect from those external pressures.
And to reconnect with our own inner guidance.
To remember that our worth is inherent.
Not dependent on what we achieve or how we compare to others.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about self-sabotage.
Yeah.
And how to overcome it.
We've explored some powerful tools and strategies.
But before we wrap up our deep dive into The Mountain is You,
yeah,
I was wondering if you could leave our listeners with a final thought.
Okay, so Wiest challenges us to reflect on our own personal mountain.
Okay.
What self-sabotaging patterns are you ready to overcome?
That's a great question.
It is. What small step can you take today to start climbing?
It's a reminder that change starts with that first step.
Even if it's just identifying one small area.
Where we want to make a shift.
Remember, you have the strength and the resilience to reach the summit.
The journey might be challenging.
But the view from the top is worth it.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into The Mountain is You.
It's been a pleasure.
We hope you've gained some valuable insights.
And some practical tools to help you on your own journey.
To overcome self-sabotage.
And create a life that is truly aligned with your highest potential.
Until next time, keep exploring.
Keep climbing.